Miatta Fahnbulleh is the Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation and joins me now. Miatta, good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. So, sign me up for a 4-day week on 5 days pay and more holidays.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, look, this is a policy that we at the New Economics Foundation have been kind of calling for a while. And I think the thing to remember is that, a 5-day week a while ago was not a given. So people had to work and trade unions had to kind of campaign in order to achieve that. And what's really interesting is that over the kind of post-war period, what we saw is that when we had increases in productivity, that translated in part to reductions in working hours. And then that link between productivity gains and people working less basically broke from the 1980s onwards. So we went from 46 hours to 40 hours, and then it kind of stagnated. So I think what the Labour Party is saying is, well, that's deeply unfair. And actually, people should be rewarded by the fact that productivity is improving by working less and having the
But
same pay.
aren't they rewarded by being paid more?
Well, historically, they were being paid more and there were reductions in time. And what we've seen is that actually for about 30 years, yes, they were being paid more, but they weren't having their time reduced. And then over the last 10 years, they've neither been paid more nor have they had their time reduced. So the question is, well, we've seen productivity gains. Where have they gone? And this is why the Labour Party is saying that you need a deliberate policy, and it's two parts. So it's in part strengthening the power of trade unions, the power of people to come together to protect their interests through collective bargaining, and using industrial campaigns. So sector by sector, workers can basically say, what's the best deal for us, and can we have reductions in our time as part of that? And then alongside doing what, in effect, the last Labour government did with the Working Time Commission, where it said, we're going to create a body that will look at the state of the economy, look at the gains that are in the economy, and then we'll translate that into improvements in minimum wage. But basically trying to do the same for working time and saying when there are improvements in the economy, we should be thinking about how we can translate that into statutory holidays. And that is the thing that will drive reductions in working time over the course of the year.
Yeah, I mean, that would make more sense, wouldn't it, to say to people, right, what we're going to do is extend your holidays rather than have 1 day off a week. Because
Well,
there are lots of companies. Hang on, Miatta. There are lots of companies. I can see what the Labour Party acolytes saying, look, these big companies that are making all these profits and we're not seeing any of them, and that's not fair. That's fair enough. But the majority of people in this country are not employed by those companies. They're employed by small or medium-sized companies that are not riding off the back of the worker. They are not taking money out of the back pocket of the worker. How are they going to support and afford this?
So you're completely right, and it's really important to be clear that what the Labour Party are not calling for is a sort of blanket cap and say, in the way that the French did and say, look, we're just going to legislate that they have a cap of 32 hours and that's it. What they're saying is that you do it sector by sector so that you negotiate gains in the economy and then you think about, well, what does that mean for pay? What does that mean for our working hours? And then you do this thing of saying across the year where we've seen improvements, we will do it in terms of holidays, statutory holidays. It's a really important point. They're not saying it's a kind of requirement. They're saying we'll create statutory holiday and then leave you, the worker, to decide with your employee how you want to then use that.
Are you talking an extra 52 days a year, though? Because if it's a day a week, that's my maths.
Well, so I think it's a combination of the two. So we're talking about average working time. We're not talking about a ceiling on this. It's average working time. And so it will be a combination of time being reduced in particular sectors where actually there are productivity gains. That means you can afford to do it. And when we think about things like automation that's happening, we think there will be productivity gains that we should translate into reduction in time. And then statutory holidays, and it's a combination.
But a reduction in time is fine, isn't it? Providing that is matched with a reduction in pay.
Well, no. So it's funny because these were exactly the same arguments that were played out when the last Labour government introduced the low pay commission and minimum wage. It was said the economy can't afford them. If you do this, the bedrock of our economy, small businesses will go under, and that didn't happen. And in fact, some of the research that we've shown says that if you can decrease the amount of time that people work, then actually that has a knock-on effect on productivity. So it's a bit of a virtuous cycle, partly because if people are overworked, they're less productive. It's kind of common sense and no-brainer. So if you reduce their number of time, then actually they can do far more and they're more productive in work. But it also means that actually if they have more leisure time, what the economic evidence is showing is that people who have more leisure time are likely to spend more, which is likely to increase demand in the economy, which means that actually companies can then be confident that they can invest and expand in order to respond to that demand. So we think that it's not just good for workers, but in the long term, it will be good for productivity, it will be good for the economy.
But we've got a situation today where one of the big companies is reporting now that people who work from home, in inverted commas, are indeed malingering, that they're not productive, and so that looks like it's backfiring. What makes you think this won't backfire?
Well, so I think I think it's a bit more complicated, and actually the evidence isn't wholly clear that people who are working flexibly aren't productive. In fact, the evidence suggests the alternative.
Well, not in this case. If you have a look through the papers today, there's a big story about a big company that's saying actually they're not productive.
Well, I think it depends company on company, sector on sector, the sort of work, the conditions by which people are working flexibly. But, I go back to the point that, in the end, all we can go by is the evidence that we have. You look at other European countries. So the UK, we are working more hours at 37 hours than many of our other European counterparts. And yet we see improvements in productivity. So productivity in the UK is far less than other European countries. It has lagged behind, and yet they're working less. So we think there is a feedback loop that we haven't exploited as a country. We think there's an opportunity here. And I think for most people out there, the idea, people who are working really, really long hours, who have seen improvements in their companies but aren't necessarily feeling the benefits, this doesn't feel like that much of a no-brainer. And it is part of a historical trend. So we've gone from a 46-hour back in 1949 to 40 hours in 1940. And actually, if we hadn't seen this slowdown, this reversal in the trend in the last 30, 40 years, we'd be on 33 hours now. So I think all the Labour Party is saying is let's reverse that trend. Let's put in some policy that will help this along the way.